Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to come back to Brussels. This is the third time I've been here, and in the past I was impressed by what I would call the Brussels blend, what I think is the seamless connection between the local and the global and the past and the present. This is the European capital, this is a world capital, this is a true global metropolis. And what I'm going to talk about today is the American metropolitan experience, and particularly the Washington, D.C. metropolitan experience, your sister metro. And I hope that that informs your thinking and your discourse. And essentially, any conversation about America must begin with the economy and the aftermath of this recession. We lost 8.8 million jobs during our recession. We've only regained about 25%. Our unemployment level has hovered around 9% for about 29 consecutive months. We have 15% of our population living in poverty. That's 46 million people. And many of the unemployed have been unemployed for long periods of time, losing their skills and losing their attachment to the labor market. This is the most important statistic. This recession hit most of America and most Americans. 3 in 4 Americans either lost their job or knew someone who did. This was not a regionally based recession. So the question for the United States is how to chart a different path. And at Brookings, along with a chorus of business leaders and mainstream economists, we are basically putting forward the following proposition. First, we must grow a different kind of economy, an economy that is driven by exports and more global engagement, powered by low carbon, fueled by innovation, and rich with opportunity. So this is a vision where the United States exports more, wastes less, innovates in what matters, produces and deploys more of what we invent, and actually builds an economy that works for working families. That economy will be largely metropolitan. The top 100 metros in the United States, as you will see, house about 2/3 of our population and generate 3/4 of our GDP. There is no American economy. What we have is essentially a network of metropolitan economies, and I would say the same for Europe. Therefore, the challenge for the United States post-recession is how do we unleash the engines of our American metropoles, the energies, the talent, the dynamism. Now, in theory, if you want to restructure economy, you might want to have a national government set different rules. You might want to price carbon. You might want to invest in advanced R&D. You might want to have sane and sensible immigration laws. We essentially don't have a national government right now in the United States. It is polarized, it is partisan, it is rife with division. So this economy that we're going to build that I will show, we will be built from the ground up the hard way, through a pragmatic caucus of business, civic, political, university leaders that essentially strengthen the strengths of their own places. So let's start with the vision, and let's start first with exports. And the vision for the United States is a country where more firms in more sectors trade more goods and services seamlessly with the world, particularly with those countries that are rapidly urbanizing and industrializing. We essentially have crossed an economic Rubicon in the world. The BRICS, Brazil, India, and China, are now 1/5 of global GDP, surpassing the United States for the first time. In a short period of time, they will grow their share to about 26%. Now, the rise of Brazil, India, and China is the rise of their cities. That's why they're powerful. For the first time in recorded history, more than half of the world lives in cities and metropolitan areas, and that will grow to about 60% by 2030. What we have now is a different locus of the global economic order. During this recession and after this recession, the highest performing metros are in Asia and Latin America, and the struggling metros are in North America, the United States, and in Europe. We essentially have to reorient our economy in the United States towards one driven by exports. We have mostly focused on domestic consumption and housing and retail. And you can see the figures here for the portion of our economy that's dedicated to exports versus China, Canada, India, Japan, and the European Union. This will be a challenge for us because our transport networks, particularly around our major metropolitan areas, are clogged and congested. It will also be a challenge because Americans don't get out much. We're the most diverse country in the world and the most insular. Only 28% of Americans have a passport. So can the US get back into the export game? We think the answer is yes, because we still are a major manufacturing power in aircraft, in spacecraft, in high precision surgical instruments, in quality pharmaceuticals. Our recovery, the sluggish recovery we have had to date because of our crippled consumption domestically, has largely been driven by exports and largely been driven by goods production. We also have services in the United States that we export, either international students coming to our universities, business services going abroad, and that gives us a surplus, a strong surplus, a growing surplus of export services. 2 years ago, the president challenged the country to double exports in the next 5 years. That's exactly the kind of ambitious challenge we need to create jobs in the near term and retool our economy for the long haul. Second hallmark of a different growth model is low carbon, and that's because everything is changing. The energy we use, the infrastructure we build, the products we buy, and the communities we construct is changing to more renewable sources of energy, a shift towards more sustainable products, a shift to communities where we walk less and walk more and spend less, have a higher quality of life. Now, can the US play in the low carbon revolution? We already have about 2.7 million clean, green jobs in our economy, even though this issue is highly polarized. That is double the biosciences sector, bigger than the fossil fuel sector, and about less than half of the IT sector. But this is large and it's growing. We define the clean economy as any economic activity that produces goods and services with an environmental benefit. And what I'll say to you is that it is a very broad and diverse economy, covering renewable energy, energy and resource efficiency, greenhouse gas reduction and environmental management and recycling, agricultural and resource conservation, and education and compliance. 5 super sectors that spread out in our economy across about 40 subsectors. So we may be having an ideological debate about the clean economy in the United States, but this is a broad, it's a diverse, and it's a growing portion of our economy, and it has to be part of our next growth model. Third hallmark is innovation. Innovation is always the fuel, the catalyst for economic growth and productivity. I think we're going through a period, perhaps, of technological acceleration and deployment of new technology. Self-driving vehicles or EV technology, smart homes, remote healthcare for the consumer market. But also cities are experiencing the deployment of technology to make them more resource efficient, to reduce energy use, to increase the efficiency of negotiating your way through these major metropolitan areas, mostly outside the United States, I would say. This is a large, potentially very large market in a relatively short period of time. Can the US continue to be the world's innovation nation around these new technologies, and particularly around the clean economy? We are struggling. We're ranked 45th out of 93 countries in the share of bachelor's degrees that come from science and engineering degrees. And we've seen in a relatively short period of time a shift from having a surplus in advanced technology products to having a deficit. We may be the generator of ideas, but because we bought into the post-industrial economy, we are not producing this technology on our own shores. Those countries that do not produce will innovate less, if not today, then tomorrow. So what we like to say in the United States, I'm not sure this is translatable, is it's time to rediscover our innovation mojo. Not just in MIT, not just in Stanford, not just in the advanced research facilities of our global companies, but on our factory floors. We have to make things again in the United States if we want to have broad-based prosperity. Last point is opportunity. If you actually built an economy that was export-driven and low carbon and rich with innovation, you would have firms that pay better wages and provide better benefits. That's the truth about the exporting sector. You would have jobs that cross a broad section of occupation and skills, particularly in the low carbon economy. And again, innovation is always the catalyst for the next stage of economic evolution and prosperity. Here's the challenge for our country, which I think relates to yours. We have to get real smart, real fast, because our workforce is diversifying. Today, about 25% of our workforce is African American and Hispanic. In a relatively short time, that will grow to about 40% of our workforce. Here's the challenge. The racial and ethnic disparities between whites and Asians in our society and African Americans and Hispanics is substantial. It is hard to imagine we can grow a competitive economy, the next economy, unless we upgrade the education and skills of these individuals. This is not just an equity issue or a fairness issue. This is a competitiveness issue for the United States, and frankly, I would say an issue of national security. The good news is we're beginning to attract more high-skilled immigrants, particularly from China and India. They are coming to our advanced research institutions, and we are trying to get them to stay by giving them special visas to work, particularly in the technology sector. That's a macro growth model. It's hard to restructure an economy the size of the US, but the bottom line is it will happen from the bottom up and must engage our cities and metros because they're the real heart of our economy. These are the top 100 metropolitan areas in the United States, starting with New York at 18 million, LA at 12 million, Chicago at 9 million. After decades of growth, they are now 2/3 of our population, and they are 3/4 of our GDP, and they seamlessly envelop cities and suburbs and exurbs, and yes, the rural periphery. Political borders are not markets. These metropolitan areas are the true commuter sheds, the true labor markets. They pack a very powerful punch. Chicago is about 2/3 of the population of the state of Illinois. It is 78% of the economic output of that state. Seattle, 50% of the state of Washington, close to 70% of the economic output. 47 of our 50 states have a majority of their GDP generated by metropolitan areas, including quote-unquote such rural states as Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas and Arkansas. There are times when it's not clear whether the United States knows who it is anymore. We still think of ourselves as networks of small towns and agrarian states long past. Now these metros are powerful because they combine, they concentrate, they agglomerate the global companies, the small and medium-sized enterprises, the firms that fuel growth, but also the ecosystems of innovation. Advanced research institutions, community colleges, intermediaries that focus on skills, local governments that are friendly to business growth. Here's the top 100 metros as we think about this growth model. Again, about 2/3 of our population, about 3/4 of our service exports, a little less than 2/3 of our goods manufacturing, because a lot of those are in smaller metropolitan areas. But when we think about our trade with China and what we sell to these countries, disproportionately produced in these top 100 metro areas. Now, obviously, New York, and Chicago and Houston or LA are supersized exporters, more than $50 billion apiece. These other 6 metros also trade over $25 billion a year. These 10 metros together produce 30% of the goods and services we sell abroad. It's a highly concentrated economy. There's a whole different set of smaller metros that have 15, 20, 25, close to 30% of their economies dedicated to export, with Wichita, which is an aircraft production hub, at about 30%. So it's not just the large metros that we have to think about. It's smaller places that are globally engaged. And then these are our hubs: air hubs, sea hubs, land hubs. This is where logistics, as you said, Carl, basically are concentrated. Clean economy, the growth sectors of the clean economy, solar, wind, renewable, and particularly the building energy efficient sector, are highly focused, highly concentrated in these metropolitan areas. It's not surprising, since the bulk of the buildings in the United States and the bulk of the people live in these places. Again, it's variegated. So these are the supersized performers. New York with about 150,000 clean economy jobs. Each of these 10 metros have about 40,000 jobs in the clean economy and growing. But these smaller metros, starting with Albany, New York, where General Electric is located, have 3, 4, 5, 6% of the jobs in their economy committed to the clean economy. This is not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It is absolutely an environmental imperative for the world and for the United States to move down this path. But this is about job growth in particular clusters, in particular places. Innovation, not surprising to anyone here, hyper-concentrated in the top 100 metros, because these are the places that concentrate our most talented workers. They produce the bulk of our patents. They receive the lion's share of advanced research funding, and almost all the venture capital in the United States comes out of these top 100 metros. So these are very powerful economies. Let's just talk about Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is about 5.5 million people. It is the land of fragmentation. 1 federal district, 3 states, 15 counties, 94 municipalities. Highly divided, highly fragmented place that is growing very rapidly. It is the 7th largest population, metro area by population. It is the 4th largest economy right now in the US by gross metro product, building off this powerful base of our national government and particularly our defense establishment. It is attracting people from all over the world. America is a nation of immigrants. Occasionally we turn xenophobic. Occasionally we try to erect barriers to immigration. But this is what makes America ultimately a powerful economy, because we constantly can replenish our population, particularly with aging. Washington attracting individuals from El Salvador because of the civil strife in El Salvador in the 1980s, from India and South Korea. Look at the skill level of the immigrants that we're attracting. High-skilled people coming to the international community, obviously to the World Bank and the IMF and the Interdevelopment Bank, the equivalent of NATO and the European Commission here, but also going into our private sector, into life sciences, into infotech. Washington's doing better than the rest of the country. Our unemployment rate in Washington, D.C. is 6%. Frankly, at times this is not the best thing in the world, because those politicians in Washington are in like a cocoon compared to the rest of our country. So they don't experience the level of anxiety that our country feels. Exports, not as much of an export economy, because we don't produce many goods in the Washington metro. What we do produce are services, right? We attract a lot of people for tourism, absolutely essential. Those are foreign dollars coming in. And then professional services and management services. But we don't produce much. We're not Detroit. We're not a goods production place. Clean jobs, more intense. Part of that is because of regulation and compliance, waste to energy, conservation. So the clean economy is alive and well in Washington, D.C., again, essential. Innovative capacity. Patents not that large because patents tends to really reside in those metros that are manufacturing powerhouses. We're not, but we've a lot of high-tech employment because of infotech and life sciences. And again, educational attainment, sort of a mixed bag. Our white population, better educated than the white population in the country as a whole. African Americans, Hispanics, not as educated in many respects. So we've got some huge racial and ethnic disparities in our region that we need to basically deal with if we want to grow for the future. Last point. This is probably the most important point. How do you restructure an economy? Again, in theory, you have a national government or a supranational body like the EU set the platform for a different kind of growth. In the US, we've had 25 years of consumption-led growth. A lot of that is embedded in our national policy that subsidizes real estate over production and innovation. So in theory, you would change all that if you wanted to rebuild an economy. That ain't gonna happen in the United States anytime soon because the Democrats and the Republicans are in a death spiral together. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna build it from the ground up. And we're going to start by cities and metropolitan areas innovating locally. In the prior economy, many cities and metros acted like our national government. They focused on Starbucks and stadia, the consumption economy, amenities, retail. What we need to do going forward is have different places focus on what makes them truly distinctive in the global economy with their tradable, productive, innovative sectors. In Raleigh, that might be life sciences. In Charlotte, that might be the next generation of smart creative finance. In Atlanta, that could be trade and logistics. The prior economy seemed to be uniform across the US. A Walmart is a Walmart is a Walmart. The next economy is highly differentiated, highly variegated, so places really need to know what they're good at. Prior economy, cities and their suburban municipalities competed with each other, throwing subsidies at each other to bring a firm literally a few miles across borders. In the next economy, cities and metros and their rural environs collaborate to compete. That's the new competition. Look outside for your competition, not within. Don't compete with a place 3 or 4 or 5 miles away. That's not your competition in a world where China and India are online. So at Brookings, what we're doing is we're working with metropolitan areas in the United States. Government, yes, but even more importantly, business leaders like yourselves, university leaders, philanthropic leaders, environmentalists, labor, to basically build business plans that strengthen the strengths and build on the distinct assets and attributes of different places. We're working in Northeast Ohio, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Puget Sound outside of Seattle. This is at the metro scale or the multi-metro scale. And what these leaders are coming up with, and we're basically just a coach, we're not a consultant here, they're coming up with plans and strategies and action items that they're building that come up from their distinctive assets. In Northeast Ohio, that means taking several hundred manufacturing firms, mostly small, and retooling them for clean production. In Minneapolis, St. Paul, that means getting the entrepreneurial engine going in a metro area that's mostly constructed of Fortune 500 firms. Very few startups and entrepreneurs. And finally, in the Puget Sound, it means becoming a global hub of innovative, clean, green IT. If you actually innovate at the city and metro scale and you have a coherent, cohesive vision and a plan that you stick to over time, then you can come up to your national level and begin advocating nationally. You still need national governments. It would be nice to have one in the United States, right? It would be nice to have a united government that actually set clean energy standards for the whole country. If they don't do it, the states will do it. We finally got 3 relatively small trade agreements passed in the United States. These agreements have been in negotiation for a long time and have literally just been sitting around waiting to get enacted. But you need national governments to set a platform. You need national governments to align with metropolitan visions. At the state level, Ohio should align with what Northeast Ohio wants. In Minnesota, they should align with Minneapolis. In Washington State, they should align with the strengths and the attributes of Seattle. Same with the national government. The sort of alphabet soup of national agencies, housing and transportation and energy and labor and education, all fragmented, all compartmentalized. They should come behind metropolitan vision, since that's where the economy is. Now, in a global capital, or a nation's capital, alignment means something also. The decisions that the European Commission makes, or NATO makes, or other international organizations make, have a huge effect on Brussels. The same way our federal government has a huge effect on Washington, D.C. It can be a good effect. The Department of Homeland Security, which is a major new agency in the United States post 9/11, is moving and consolidating all of their operations to a site in the most deprived neighborhood of Washington, D.C., in the eastern part of the Anacostia River. This will be an enormous boon if it's done well. It'll be a transformative investment for that part of the region. At the same time, our Department of Defense is literally moving tens of thousands of jobs from Crystal City, which is easily accessible by transit, outside to the environs of Virginia, which are not accessible by transit. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C. and experienced our traffic congestion, you ain't seen nothing yet once this Department of Defense move is finally done. So bottom line, these international organizations and your national governments and supranational governments, they have a huge effect on these capital cities. So alignment means something even more pronounced. Last point is you want your national governments and your state governments to invest smart. In the United States, we are in a big fight to create what we call infrastructure banks and green banks, where public resources can be invested in next generation infrastructure, whether it's modern ports or high-speed rail or advanced battery technologies, public resources to leverage up private sector finance and capital and expertise. We don't have these new financing vehicles yet, and if we don't get them, the ability of the U.S. to restructure our economy will be at risk. What I would like and what I've proposed, which doesn't make me very popular in the housing community, is to take the subsidies that we now put into real estate through our mortgage interest deduction. We still subsidize mortgage interest for American homeowners. What I would say is cap that subsidy and shift it into innovation. $177 billion over 5 years. If we want to grow an American economy that actually makes things again, is at the vanguard of the clean economy revolution, is innovating in the right things, we shouldn't just be subsidizing home building anymore. We should be subsidizing the productive, export-oriented, innovative economy. Last piece, and this is hard for many cities, I think less hard for European metros than for US. You got to innovate locally, you got to advocate nationally, and you got to network globally. And networking globally means to understand your place in the global economy. I think there's a natural group of manufacturing metros in the world. These are the production engines of the global economy. Detroit relates more to Stuttgart, relates more to Shenzhen than it does to many areas of Michigan or of Ohio. Or global finance, obviously New York, London, Paris, Frankfurt, and the ambitions for Brussels. These are networks that have more to do with each other than proximate places. And understanding your place and your position in the global economy means through trade, through investment, through the seamless mobility of talented workers and innovative firms. That's how you grow economies over time. So this is a playbook that we're trying to basically unleash in the United States. Again, it is a fifth best playbook. If I had my druthers, I would still like to have a functioning national government that did basic things, that set common markets, phrase you use, for next generation economy. But if we don't have that, in the United States, in a federal republic, we have a default proposition, which is to build the next economy from the ground up through these top 100 metropolitan areas. So when we think about our country and when we think about the world, it is not a uniform landscape. The energy and the talents and the dynamism of economies in our country, in Europe, in the rising nations are located in these metropolitan areas. And the more we help these places collaborate to compete, the better off we'll all be. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.